Hi, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar titled Form I-9 and E-Verify. We know that everyone is extremely busy on the call today, and we certainly appreciate your participation in this webinar. My name is Melissa Prentice, and I am the Director of Sales and Marketing at I-9 Advantage, and I am delighted to meet all of you virtually. We are extremely pleased to introduce Jennifer Nelson. Jennifer is a program analyst with the USCIS, and she will be our key presenter this afternoon. Joining Jennifer is Sue Colway, both with the Outreach Division of E-Verify, which is a part of the USCIS. And at this time, I'd like to turn the call over to Jennifer.
Great, thank you so much. And I'd also like to thank I-9 Advantage and Equifax just for inviting us to come speak today and help educate about the Form I-9 and E-Verify. As mentioned, Sue and I are both part of the outreach team here at E-Verify, and we provide training to employers and employer associations across the country for both Form I-9 and E-Verify. So we're very happy to be here today, and we've got a lot of great information to share with everyone. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at our agenda. We are going to talk first about the Form I-9, and we will kind of break it down piece by piece. We'll look at each section of that Form I-9, where you're going to be filling it out as the employer, as well as where the employee will fill it out, and what needs to be entered in each of those sections. We will also talk about storage and retention of the Form I-9. As you know, if you've got those employees, you do need to have that Form I-9 on file and then retain it for a certain period of time after they've left your organization as well. So we'll touch on that. And then we are going to talk about how the Form I-9 and E-Verify work together for employment verification. And especially with E-Verify, how to enroll in that program, some of the benefits of it, and then how to create cases once you are an enrolled user. At the end, we'll wrap back around and give you some resources so that if you have questions following today's webinar, you know where to go to get those answers. So starting here with individuals who can legally work in the United States. And you're going to see these categories again when we look a little closer at the Form I-9. But basically, there's 4 categories of individuals who can legally work in the United States. And that's what we're looking at here. First of all, we've got U.S. citizens. And this category includes people who were born in the United States. They may have naturalized or derived that citizenship status. Next are non-citizen nationals of the United States. And this is actually a pretty small group of employees, but most of them were born in the American Samoa, including Swains Island, and who owe allegiance to the United States, but don't have certain rights. One example of that would be the right to vote in a federal election. Third are the lawful permanent residents, and you might hear these folks referenced as our green card holders. And then finally, we've got aliens authorized to work. And aliens authorized to work are a category of workers who don't fall within one of those top 3 categories, but they do have legal work authorization in the United States. And some examples of that are a foreign student with work authorization, or a refugee, and also asylees fall into this category. And again, we're going to see this, these statuses a little bit later, again, when we take a closer look at Section 1. Here we're going to break it down as to what employees need to do and employers need to remember for that Form I-9. So starting at the top here with employees. Your employees need to complete Section 1 of that form no later than their first day of work for pay. And they're also going to need to present you acceptable documents to prove their identity and their employment authorization no later than the 3rd business day following their first day of work for pay. So as employers, you need to make sure that that Form I-9 is completed and retained for any employee you've hired after November 6th of 1986. You'll use the most current version of the Form I-9 in completing that. That's going to be the one dated July 17th of 2017. And you can find that revision date in the lower left-hand corner of each page of the form. Again, you'll want to make sure that that Form I-9 is completed. And once the employee's completed Section 1, you'll take a look at that, make sure that that's all been entered. Section 2 then is where you're going to record the document review that's done by the employer. And that portion of the form must be done no later than the 3rd business day following the employee's first day of work for pay. And then finally, just kind of a reminder there at the bottom that you cannot use the Form I-9 to pre-screen employment applicants. That job must have been offered to the employee and accepted by the employee before you have them complete the Form I-9. All right, so here we're going to talk very briefly about that Form I-9 process as it pertains to E-Verify. And we're going to talk more detail about E-Verify a little bit later. But first of all, what's required of those employees once you've enrolled into E-Verify? We'll see in section 1 of the form that there is a block for the Social Security number. That block is voluntary. It's a voluntary entry for your employee if you're only using the Form I-9. Once you've enrolled into E-Verify and begin using E-Verify, that block becomes mandatory. And that's because as an employer, you need that Social Security number in order to create a case in E-Verify. And also, if an employee chooses to present you a List B identity document, it must be one that contains a photograph. And we'll talk again about that a little bit later. And then as employers, the time frame that you have to create that case in E-Verify is the 3rd business day following the employee's first day of work for pay. So it goes right in line with the time frame that you have to do that document review and get section 2 of your Form I-9 completed. We're going to also see a block on section 1 of the Form I-9 for an employee's email address. If the employee provides their email address, that is a voluntary entry for the employee, but if they choose to provide it and you're using E-Verify, you must enter that when creating the case in the system. If an employee provides you one of the photo match documents, regardless of your previous policies to retain photocopies of the acceptable documents, you do need to make a photocopy of the photo match documents and retain that with the Form I-9. And then finally, section 3 of the form. That portion of the form is used for re-verification. As an E-Verify user, you will get a nice little reminder that re-verification is soon going to be needed in section 3 of the Form I-9, but you will not create a new case in E-Verify. It's just a nice little reminder for you that re-verification is soon going to be needed on the form. As an employer for that Form I-9, you have the opportunity or the option to have an authorized representative complete the Form I-9 section 2 on your behalf. We often get asked, when would I need to do this? Why would I do this? Well, if you have remote hiring sites and you can't be physically present with the employee to review the documents that they've provided, that is something that must be done in the presence of the employee. So if that's a situation you're facing, you can designate an authorized representative to complete section 2 on your behalf. That authorized representative would then do the document review, they would conduct that in the presence of the employee, and then fill out section 2 and sign it and date it. They're actually acting as an agent of the employer when they're doing that. So it's important to keep in mind that no matter who is doing that, the employer of record is still liable for any errors that person might make. And we've listed some of the common examples of these authorized representatives here on this slide. All right, so to take a little bit closer look here at the list of acceptable documents, which is what you see on the left, and then on the right are sections 1 and 2 of that Form I-9. So let's start talking here a little bit about that list of acceptable documents. This list must be made available to each new hire. And then from this list, your employee can choose which List A document or combination of B and C documents they wish to provide to you to prove their identity and their employment authorization. Now, those List A documents can be provided on their own because they establish those two things that an employee needs to prove to you, their identity and their employment authorization. B and C always need to be provided together because List B documents only establish identity, List C documents only establish employment authorization. I also want to point out on here under List C, number 1, and I know the screenshot's pretty tiny here, but if you pull up a list of acceptable documents, you can kind of look to that List C, number 1. We've now written out those printed restrictions that make a Social Security card unacceptable for Form I-9 purposes. So you'll always want to check a Social Security card that an employee gives to you make sure it does not include one of these printed restrictions. And if it does, just know it's not acceptable for Form I-9, and the employee must give you an alternate List C document or give back both the B and C, and the employee can give you a List A document. Taking a look then at sections 1 and 2 of the Form I-9, these are obviously the portions of the form that are going to be completed by you and the employee. That section 1, like we talked about, must be done no later than the employee's first day of work for pay. And with the most current version of the form, we call this a Smart Fillable PDF. And if your employee is completing it on a computer, there's a lot of really nice Smart Fillable features to the form. As you look throughout the form, there's these little blue bubbles with a question mark in them. Those are helper text. If you or your employee clicks on any of those, it brings up additional information about that specific line item so that you know what needs to be entered there, or your employee has no question about what information they need to provide in there. Additionally, the form includes 15 pages of instructions, and those instructions must be made available to your new hire. Now you can make those available in many different ways. You can print a fresh set for each new hire. You could laminate those instructions and provide them over and over at various onboarding sessions. Or if your employee is able to fill out the form on a computer that has access to the internet, there's also this instruction button at the top of the page. If the employee is able to fill out the form on that computer with access to the internet, this button makes those instructions available to them, making it very easy for you as the employer to meet that requirement of making the instructions available. The form is also available in English and in Spanish. Now that Spanish version can be used as a translation guide anywhere in the United States, but only in Puerto Rico can it be completed and retained as the official record. All other locations across the country can certainly use it for that translation guide, but they must complete and retain the English version as their official record of the Form I-9. All right, taking a closer look here at part of section 1 of the form. Again, this is going to be completed by the employee. And if we look at that top row of information being requested, it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's the last name, first name, middle initial. And then the last field there is the other last names used field. And this is going to be any other last names that the employee has used or had as a legal last name. So this would include a maiden name. And if the employee has had no other legal last names, they should enter N/A in this field, indicating that it's not applicable to them. Below that is their address information. And then the final row of blocks includes that date of birth, the social security number, and the employee's email address and telephone number. Now, as we talked about earlier, that social security number field is a voluntary option, voluntary entry for the employee, unless their employer is using E-Verify. If you're enrolled in E-Verify, that becomes a mandatory block. Also, the email address and telephone number are both optional entries for the employee. They can choose to provide that information or not. However, if they choose not to provide that information, they must enter N/A in that block, indicating that that is not applicable to them. The instructions to the revised Form I-9 are very clear in that these two fields cannot be left blank. So the employee either needs to enter the information or enter that N/A, so that it's very apparent that these fields were not skipped. Also part of section 1 is the employee attestation. And this is where we see those 4 work eligible categories again. So here, the employee is going to indicate which of those 4 work eligible categories that they fall within. And if they indicate that they're a lawful permanent resident or an alien authorized to work, they need to enter some additional information. So as you can see, there's a line following number 3, which is the lawful permanent resident. And here, the employee should either enter their alien number or their USCIS number. Below that is the alien authorized to work. And on the line following that entry, an employee should enter the expiration date of their work authorization if that applies to them. Now, some employees are going to be able to write N/A in here because that work authorization expiration date is not applicable to them, and that's perfectly fine. In addition to that, the aliens authorized to work need to enter one piece of information below. They either need to provide their alien registration or USCIS number, or their I-94 admission number, or their foreign passport number or country of issuance at the bottom there. So these are an or. It's going to be one or the other. They no longer need to provide multiple pieces of information there. And you'll notice here on my example, my employee has selected that they're a lawful permanent resident, and the fields below that then were automatically populated with N/A. This was obviously done on the Smart PDF version of the form, and so it makes it very clear for that employee to know that these fields are unrelated to the attestation that they selected. They do not need to enter any of that additional information. So again, just kind of one of those nice features built into this Smart PDF if your employee is able to fill it out on a computer. At the bottom then is where the employee is going to sign and date the form. And again, this must be done no later than the employee's first day of work for pay. Also found in section 1 is the preparer or translator certification area. And this portion of the form is required when the employee required assistance with section 1. So if they needed a preparer or maybe they needed translation assistance, those individuals would be filling out this portion of the form. Now you'll notice there's some check boxes at the top. These are required fields. So if the employee did not use a preparer or translator, they should check that first box. And that basically locks the fields below on the computer completed version so that no one can enter information below. If they did use a preparer or translator, they will check the second box here, and then this little drop down appears on the right-hand side. Once you click the drop-down arrow, that employee can select multiple preparers or translators if they needed that, and up to 4 additional preparers or translators can be entered. So once that number is entered, the additional fields below for those preparers or translators will appear so that they can enter their signatures as well as their biographic information. And if you're using the form on paper, that's perfectly fine too. There is a supplemental sheet that mimics this feature of the form as well. All right, then moving on to section 2 of the Form I-9. This is where you as the employer is going to record that document review. This portion of the form must be done no later than 3 business days after the employee's first day of work for pay. And when you're reviewing those documents, just keep in mind that the documents must be original and unexpired at the time that they are presented to you, and you must review them in the presence of the employee. So let's kind of step through this portion of the form just to kind of keep things very clear as to what needs to be entered. So if you look to the top, right under the instructions, it's asking for the employee's name, their last and first name, then their middle initial, and then their citizenship or immigration status. This is the number corresponding to the immigration or citizenship status that the employee selected in section 1 of the form. If you're using the form on paper, this should just be a number selection. You should not enter the full citizenship or immigration status that the employee entered. It's just going to be the number corresponding to that status. And then if you're filling out the form on a computer, that unlocks the fields below so that you're able to enter those acceptable documents that were presented by the employee. And another nice feature of the Smart Fillable PDF version is that once you've selected that immigration or citizenship status, the documents that pertain to that status will be at the top of the list once you've selected this drop-down arrow. So it's very clear to you that this employee, based on the status they indicated that they are, were issued the document that they provided to you. Now, all of the other documents for list A, B, and C are also shown, and if you select one that is unrelated to that citizenship or immigration status, the form is going to give you a little pop-up indicating that there could be an error, and give you instructions on how to correct that issue. Moving down then to the certification area, we've got this red circle here on the line. That's where you'll enter the employee's first day of work for pay. So we often get the question, can we fill out this Form I-9 or have the employee fill out the Form I-9 before their first day of work for pay? And the answer to that is yes, you absolutely can, as long as there was a job offered to the employee and accepted by the employee. Once that has been done and that employee-employer relationship exists, you can go ahead and have them complete the Form I-9. The date employee completes Section 1 and signs, they'll use the current date. The date you do the document review and sign in Section 2 at the bottom is going to be the current date, the date you reviewed the documents. The date that's going to go on this line where we have this red circle is going to be that date in the future that the employee will begin working for pay. And while we're talking about examining those documents, we just want to kind of remind employers out there that we don't expect you to be a document expert. However, you do need to accept a document presented by an employee as long as it appears to be genuine and relate to the individual presenting it. All documents must be original. You cannot use webcam to review those documents. You do need to review them in the presence of the employee. Photocopies are not acceptable. The only exception to that rule is a certified copy of a birth certificate. So that's typically going to be the one with the stamped raised seal showing that it is, in fact, a certified copy. And then just a couple document tips here. All documents must be unexpired when they're presented, and there are some special circumstances when a document may appear to be expired on its face. One example of that is temporary protected status. Also, the documents that you accept must be issued by a federal, state, or local government agency. And for E-Verify participants, as we talked about before, those List B documents that are presented must be one that contain a photograph. And then finally, as we talked about previously, those Social Security cards, if it contains one of those notations of restriction, that's not acceptable for Form I-9 purposes. You must ask for either a different document from List C or give back the B and C, and the employee can give you a List A document. Because again, that List A document proves both identity and employment authorization. As far as photocopying the documents that an employee presents to you, an employer can choose to make photocopies or not make photocopies. This is really a business practice for you. Just keep in mind that if you are making photocopies, you need to be doing so consistently and doing so for all new hires, regardless of their citizenship or immigration status. And there are some special requirements for those E-Verify users. As I mentioned previously, if you're enrolled in E-Verify, we do have a photo match feature in E-Verify. And if an employee provides you a photo match document, you must make a photocopy of it and retain it with the person's Form I-9. And we're going to see a little bit more information about that later too. All right, so moving on to Section 3 of the Form I-9, this portion is required for re-verification of an employee's temporary work authorization that is expiring. If your original verification was done on an older version of the Form I-9, you will need to do the re-verification on the most current version of the Form I-9. So again, make sure you're using that one dated July 17th of 2017. And you would just do the employee's name, enter the employee's name under Section 2 instructions, and then fill out Section 3 for re-verification. And then you'll attach the new form to the old form. That way you're maintaining your historic documentation while also meeting your requirement of re-verification. And also for re-verification, an employee can provide you any document from either List A or C that they choose to to provide you their work authorization. A lot of times employers think that they must get an updated version of the original document that the employee gave to them, for instance, an employment authorization document. And that's just simply not the case. The employee can choose to provide any List A or C document because any of those documents prove the employee's work authorization. Also, you can choose to use Section 3 if you have a rehire situation where that employee is being rehired within 3 years of their original Form I-9 completion, or to make biographic updates of the employee outside of reverification. If there have been biographic changes, like the employee's last name changed, and you're updating that during reverification, that is required. But if it's outside of reverification, you can choose to use Section 3 to record those changes as well. Again, you'll notice these two bullets at the bottom are under the may category. You're not required to do this for Section 3, but you may choose to use Section 3 for that. Section 3 must, however, be used for reverification. All right, just a couple pointers here in staying compliant with those Form I-9 requirements. You'll always want to go back and do a double take. Check that Section 1. Make sure the employee entered their name, address. Make sure that they signed the attestation. And if they are a lawful permanent resident or an alien authorized to work, make sure that they entered that additional information that is required of those statuses. Make sure in Section 2 that the hire date was entered, that Section 2 was signed, and that all of those required documents, acceptable documents that we've talked about, have been recorded in Section 2. And this is true even if you're making photocopies of those documents. Making photocopies of the documents does not replace the need to complete and sign Section 2. All right, moving on then. We do encourage employers to do internal audits of your Form I-9s. And if you've done an internal audit and you see that you have a mistake on the Form I-9, you have a couple options in how to correct that. You can choose to correct the existing Form I-9, in which case you're just going to line through that incorrect information, enter the correct information, and then initial and date that change. Or you can choose to do a whole new Form I-9. If you're choosing to do a whole new Form I-9, make sure you attach the new to the old. And again, it's a good idea to make a memo with that, indicating the reason for your actions, showing why that you're doing a whole new Form I-9, just in case you do get audited. And then another point here, if you see that an error was made in Section 1 of the Form I-9, that section, again, is the employees section. So you'd want to bring in the employee to make those corrections in Section 1, or their preparer or translator if they needed that. Again, those corrections will just be made like the others with the simple line through, enter the correct information, and then initial and date. If you're missing a Form I-9, you should immediately provide that employee with most current version of the Form I-9, have the employee complete Section 1, and when they're signing, enter the current date. They'll provide you the acceptable documents, you'll complete Section 2, and then you'll sign and date with the current date. The only date that's going to be in the past is going to be that employee's first day of work for pay, that date that we talked about on the line above the signature in Section 2. That date you want to match up with your payroll records. Obviously, this was a missing Form I-9, so their original hire date is going to be a date in the past. With those missing Form I-9s, it's also a good idea to do that memo like we talked about for corrections. The memo is just, again, a good idea to kind of show good faith on your part, show proof of your actions, and so that if you are audited, there's that documentation showing why you did what you did. Finally, to talk a little bit about storage and retention. That golden rule is that the Form I-9 must be on file for all of your current employees. Now, you can store it in any way that meets your business needs. So that could be on-site or off-site, maybe at a storage facility or electronically. And if you are storing those acceptable document copies that we talked about, if that's your business practice and you're making those copies, that's great. You can store those with your Form I-9, or you're allowed to store them with the other personnel documentation for that employee. One best practice, although not required, is that you store your Form I-9s and documentation separately from the rest of your personnel information. That way, if you do get a request for inspection, you only have 3 days to provide those documents to the inspector. You could just go pull all those Form I-9s at once. You don't have to comb through any of those other personnel records to find the Form I-9 documentation. And then finally, retention. Once an employee has left your company, they're no longer with you, they've retired or been terminated or left, whatever the reason, they're no longer with your company, we have a retention rule. And that rule states that you'll add 3 years to the hire date and 1 year to the termination date. Whichever of the two of these is later is the required retention period. So after that retention date has passed, you're no longer required to store that person's Form I-9. All right, so moving into our E-Verify portion of the presentation. Some of you out there may already be familiar with E-Verify or using E-Verify, but for those of you who aren't familiar with it, here's a little bit of information about what it is and also what it's not. First of all, at the top there, E-Verify is a free program that electronically verifies the employment eligibility of your newly hired employees. And if you have a qualifying federal contract, you can also use it for existing employees who are working on that contract. Its purpose is to help maintain a legal workforce and protect jobs for authorized workers across the country. E-Verify is not a system that provides immigration status. It's only to be used for employment authorization. Like the Form I-9, it can't be used for pre-screening either. There must be that employee-employer relationship before you create a case in E-Verify. And then finally, it's not a safe harbor from worksite enforcement. And by this we mean that just by signing up for E-Verify, it doesn't mean that you would never have the potential to be audited again. But it does show good faith on your part that you're doing everything you can to maintain a legal workforce at your company. And here we've put together a little schematic to kind of visually show you how this all works together. Basically, information from that Form I-9 is keyed into E-Verify. E-Verify then queries millions of government records to ensure that your new hire is legally able to work in the United States. And very quickly, typically within 3 to 5 seconds, you will get an initial case result from the system. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what those case results are going to look like and what to do with those. But first, we're going to go through the steps of creating that E-Verify case. And if you're an existing E-Verify user, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the modifications and improvements that have been made to the system over the past 6 or 8 months. We've made some updates and really modified and enhanced an E-Verify user's experience. So this is what the E-Verify homepage is going to look like. This is the screen that you will log into and kind of where you'll land once you've logged into E-Verify. There's a couple different ways to begin creating a case in the system. You can click on this Cases option on your top ribbon. From that, you can click New Case. Or you can use the quick links over here on the right-hand side of your screen and click that Verify Employee button. Either of those are going to get you to the first step in creating that case for a new hire. And then the system's going to prompt you to enter that biographic information that the employee provided on their Form I-9. Again, their last name, their first name, their middle initial. If the employee had other last names, you'll enter those, and you can tab between each of those names if the person had multiple last names to enter. Next, you'll enter the date of birth as it appeared on Section 1 of the Form I-9, and then that Social Security number. And again, you're going to need the Social Security number in order to create the case in E-Verify. Next is the employee's email address. And as we discussed, that field on the Form I-9 is an optional field. But if the employee chose to provide it, it must be entered here when creating the case in E-Verify. And the system won't actually let you move forward until you've either entered the email address or used the checkbox to the right indicating that no email address was provided by this employee. Next, you'll enter the employee's citizenship attestation. And again, you'll refer back to that Form I-9 Section 1 to find what the employee entered as their citizenship status. Once you select it here, then E-Verify is going to bring up that list, A or combination of B and C documents available from the drop-down list of documents. And that kind of helps to support better data entry into E-Verify, ensuring that those pieces of information are being entered correctly. So in our example here, the employee attested to being a lawful permanent resident, and when selected, then the then E-Verify prompts you to indicate which document type, and in this case, it was a List A document. Once you select that, E-Verify is only going to populate the List A documents that pertain to a lawful permanent resident. You would get those acceptable documents or options just by clicking that down arrow next to the List A options. Once you indicate which document the employee provided for Form I-9, you'll be asked to fill in all the required fields there before you're able to continue in the system. So in this example, we needed to enter an alien number and the document number. And we've also added some helpful features into the system that can help you find those numbers. If there's any question of where that number can be found on the document, you can click that link, where can I find this number? And a pop-up box appears. In that pop-up box, you'll find additional information about various versions of that document and where to find the document number on it. Next, E-Verify will prompt you to select the employee's first day of work for pay. So to select the employee's first day of employment, you can click Today, 1 day ago, or 2 days ago, which will then auto-populate the employee's first day of employment. Or you can select Other to manually enter a date 3 or more days earlier. And you can also enter a future date here, and that future date can be up to 90 calendar days into the future. So again, that situation that we talked about before where the job was offered and accepted, the employees filled out the Form I-9, you can go ahead and complete the E-Verify case processing, and you can enter a future hire date up to 90 days into the future. All right, and then if the system detects some potentially inaccurate data, you will automatically receive prompts to review that and update that information in real time. So you're getting these as you're processing and going through the steps. So the helper text and examples are available to help you make any of those necessary corrections to kind of help reduce those data entry errors right up front. So as you can see here, the alien number wasn't entered completely, so that field received a red error message. And for the document number field, if you try to progress without entering it, you're also going to get an error message stating that. And back to that photo match feature that I've mentioned a couple of times. Photo match is a fraudulent document detecting feature built right into E-Verify. And with this, if an employee presents you their U.S. passport or passport card, their permanent resident card, or their employment authorization document, E-Verify is going to display the photo that we have on file at the Department of Homeland Security. You'll compare that photo in E-Verify to the photograph on the person's document and then indicate in the system if the two photos match. If they don't match, that will generate a tentative non-confirmation for this individual. And then they must be given the opportunity to correct that if they wish to. All right, and then the system is going to progress forward, and if you see any details within the case that are incorrect or that need to be edited or updated, you can use this Edit Case Details button at the bottom of the screen. So it's again one of those nice modernized features that allows you to correct something that you see needs correction before you actually submit that case. So you can click that button if you see that additional information needs to be changed or fixed. If nothing does, then you'll go to the bottom and click Submit Case. And then we have our case results. With the new modernized system, employment authorized results are automatically going to be closed. So it's an automatic feature within the system. So our example here, this employer received that employment authorized result. You can see that we have a case number up here, and this case number either needs to be annotated on the person's Form I-9, or you can print those case details and attach them to the Form I-9. Some employers do both, but the memorandum of understanding that you agreed to when you signed up to use E-Verify requires that you do at least one or the other. All right, moving on to that tentative non-confirmation process. We have kind of streamlined that TNC process as well. And just so you have a little bit more information about what that TNC is, it simply means that the employee's information from the Form I-9 as it was keyed into E-Verify doesn't immediately match government records for this individual. So it's very important to not assume that this employee is not authorized to work. They must be given the opportunity to correct that tentative non-confirmation if they wish to. Any employee who chooses to correct that tentative non-confirmation or that information discrepancy is given 8 federal government workdays, and from their referral date, that 8-day time frame starts. Within that 8-day time frame, they need to at least begin a resolution to that tentative non-confirmation. So in the screenshot we see here, the employee received the tentative non-confirmation. The employee indicated that they are going to take action. And at this point, we could download the referral date confirmation document. And this document gives them confirmation that their case was in fact referred. It also gives them that deadline, that 8-day time frame, that deadline that they must go ahead and take action. Here we see some of the common reasons that an employee receives a tentative non-confirmation. Maybe the Social Security number didn't match, or their citizenship or immigration status changed, but it hasn't yet been reported. One of the most common reasons we used to see is that the name change wasn't reported. So again, they were married or divorced, didn't change their name at the appropriate agencies. So any of these reasons could result in a tentative non-confirmation. So again, it's just very important to not assume automatically that this person is not authorized to work. They must be given the opportunity to go through that TNC process. So here we see some samples of those 2 documents in the TNC process. The first one is called the Further Action Notice. This Further Action Notice is the first document in the process, and this must be promptly shared with the employee who received that tentative non-confirmation. On this document, they're going to be given their choices to either try to correct that or not correct the information discrepancy. Page 1 at the top is pre-populated. Page 2 is where they're going to indicate their decision to contest or not. And the original of this document must be kept with the employee's Form I-9. The copy will be given to the employee. The second sample over here is a referral date confirmation. This document's completely pre-populated, doesn't require any pen and ink signatures, and this one is given to those employees who have been referred. So their case has been referred, they are going to try to correct that discrepancy, and this one gives them that 8-day time frame. It gives them that deadline that they have to begin a resolution. As an employer then, when you're checking back into E-Verify, we've made it very easy for you to find any of those cases that have a pending status update. So if you look on our home screen again, at the bottom we've got these case alerts. This middle case alert is cases with new updates. So if you click on that, it's a direct link to any of those cases that have now, where their pending status has been updated. And then we just have some examples down here of what those cases are going to look like in the system. You can still find their case number. And then after a TNC, if the employee was able to resolve that discrepancy as an employment authorized, you will need to go ahead and close the case. As we talked about before, if the initial case result was employment authorized, E-Verify closes it for you, just very simple. With the TNC, because it was that pending case status and it's now finalized with employment authorized, you do need to take that one final step to go through and actually click the close case button to finalize the process. Couple reminders here for employers. You cannot use E-Verify selectively. E-Verify must be used for all new hires. Once you've enrolled to begin using E-Verify, you can't pick and choose who you're going to create cases for. If you've enrolled a hiring site to use E-Verify, you must use it on all new hires at that site. You should never influence or coerce an employee's decision whether or not to contest a tentative non-confirmation, nor should you terminate or take adverse action against an employee who is contesting a TNC. And then finally, don't ask for additional documentation after an employee receives a tentative non-confirmation. The employee needs to decide whether or not they're going to go through with that process. You should not go back to the employee and ask for different documentation to run the case again, nor should you go back to the employee and ask for documentation from SSA or DHS indicating that they have followed through with the TNC. As the employer, you're going to check back into E-Verify, our system's interface with Social Security Administration systems, so you'll actually see that case result and that pending case status right there in the E-Verify system. As an E-Verify employer, we just want to remind you that once you've enrolled, you do need to post these participation posters in a prominent location where any new hire or potential new hire can see that you are enrolled in using E-Verify. That poster in the front is provided by the Department of Homeland Security. It's kind of a split screen. It's provided in both English and in Spanish. And it lets prospective employees know that you are enrolled in E-Verify. And if they're hired with you, they're going to be run through the system. The poster in the back is provided by the Immigrant and Employee Rights section at the Department of Justice, and it gives employees information about their rights as well. Again, both of these posters need to be posted. The poster in the back is, the example we have is in English. You'll need to print this in both English and in Spanish. So there's going to be a total of 3 posters that you'll be posting. And then our resources. We've got many resources here at E-Verify for both Form I-9 and for E-Verify. You can certainly take advantage of any of our public webinars that are posted on our website, where we give training, many different opportunities for training on Form I-9 and E-Verify. We can also customize webinars very similar to the one that we're on today, where we could train all of your staff to properly use the Form I-9 or learn more about the E-Verify system. And then finally, if you'd like to use the E-Verify logo, that is a free logo that anyone using E-Verify can post on their website or on their job announcements to kind of further advertise your use in the E-Verify system. So I've given you live links to all of those today, as well as our employer hotline and email address. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa to go through some final points before we get to the questions.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's really appreciated. Again, thank you everyone for joining our call today. I-9 Advantage is sponsoring this webinar, and we are a provider of electronic I-9 systems Our systems will ensure accuracy as well as processes throughout your entire organization. And we are for more than just the electronic I-9 in terms of entering the data, but our systems will also manage all the purging of the I-9s for you, follow-up, notifications, also controls around uploading documents to ensure some of those consistencies as Jennifer spoke of. We also have a great module that's available for your remote hires, and in terms of managing all of your historical forms, we can also upload all of your paper forms, digitize those, and audit those forms as well. So we appreciate, again, your time this afternoon, and this might be a good opportunity to go through some of the questions that have come in throughout the webinar. And please do contact us. Our information is shown on the slide in front of you, sales@i9advantage.com, and our phone number is also available at 1-800-724-8546. And Jennifer, do you have questions that are up that we should address?
Sue, would you like to go through any of the questions that you received?
Yes, I think I'll share a couple with you. I apologize I didn't get to you right away. I was looking in the wrong chat box, so hopefully I got most of your questions answered, but I'm going to answer a couple of them here for everyone to hear. So we had a couple of questions on hiring those employees remotely. What happens? How do you do that? As Jenny mentioned, you can have someone, you can have a designated representative that's going to be able to fill out Section 2 for those remote hires. Now, just know that whoever does fill out Section 2 is also going to be the same person that views those documents in the presence of the employee. So once that person fills out Section 2, then really it's up to your own business practice how, like if you want them to email it to you, that the completed Form I-9, however that works best for you, is really your own business decision. And then once you do receive that completed Form I-9, then you can go ahead and create that E-Verify case, because again, all you need to do is have a completed Form I-9 to be able to create that E-Verify case. Another question was, during that tentative non-confirmation, or that TNC, what we call it, during that waiting time, do you still allow that employee to work? And as Jenny mentioned, absolutely. You are actually required to allow that employee to continue to work, to train, and to receive benefits until they receive a final case result. So if they get a final case result that shows that they were not authorized to work, like those documents didn't match or whatever, then at that point you would terminate them. But until you get that final case result, then you will keep allowing that person to work. Had a couple of questions about, one question was about a green card. If a person attests to being a lawful permanent resident in Section 1, do you need to see the green card for Section 2? And the answer is no. And again, Jenny talked about that list of acceptable documents. And a green card certainly would be an acceptable document. That's a List A document, and many times your lawful permanent resident will provide their green card for Section 2, but they can also provide any combination List B and C documents that they have. Maybe they have a driver's license or an unrestricted Social Security card. That's a combination List B and C document. They can certainly provide that if they want to. So that's why it's very, very important to always provide that list of acceptable documents to the employee so that he or she can decide which documents they want to provide to you. And then again, just jumping back on what Jenny had said earlier, if you are enrolled in E-Verify, that List B document has to contain a photo. So for instance, if that person would maybe provide a voter registration card, I haven't seen any with photos on them yet. So if that would be the case, then you would not be able to accept it. And you would just explain to them, you know, you're enrolled in E-Verify, and so any List B document has to have a photo. And then give them the opportunity to go back and find a List B document, or maybe they want to go back and provide a List A document too instead. So again, just a little bit of clarification on that. I'm going to go back and try to look for a couple more of these questions. There was one more question too, is E-Verify mandatory? That's kind of a hard question to answer because in some states it is mandatory across the board. And in some states, maybe just your state workers or contractors are required to use it. So the best thing to do for you is check with your state legislative office or maybe a Chamber of Commerce to get more information on the specifics of the E-Verify requirements for your state. And with that, I think I will send it back to the moderators. Thanks so much.
Well, I think we're at the end of our questions. Again, as a reminder to everyone on the call today, we will be sending out a follow-up email addressing some of the any unanswered questions that we come across. We also will send you a recording of this webinar that we have presented this afternoon. And once again, we certainly appreciate your time, and please contact us at I-9 Advantage if we can do any follow-up with you individually, or if there's any interest in any of our products out there. But again, thank you everyone for your time this afternoon. It is truly, truly appreciated. Thank you as well, Jennifer, and Sue. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.